If I close my eyes, I can still hear the hum of that summer night in 1999. The cicadas droned their endless song outside my open window, the smell of fresh-cut grass mingling with the faint metallic scent of an approaching storm. In my hands was a crumpled clipping from a foreign newspaper, a thin column buried deep inside the international section. Most would have skimmed past it, but something in those few lines snagged at me like a fishhook under the skin. It spoke of strange movements in the shadows overseas, whispers of men with hollow eyes and deadly patience. I didn't know it then, at least not in words, but a part of me already understood. America was standing at the edge of a cliff and the ground was beginning to crumble. That was before the long nights at my old, wheezing computer, the hours spent combing through obscure forums and grainy overseas broadcasts, before I first saw a name that would soon be etched into the conscience of the entire world, before the laughter of my neighbors turned sharp, and my warnings became the punchline to a joke no one should have told. It was before Linda stopped holding my hand when I spoke too urgently about the danger creeping toward us, and before the letters I sent, pleading, detailed, desperate, slipped into filing cabinets and were forgotten. And it was long before that morning in September, when the blue sky over Manhattan tore apart and the future I had feared came screaming into the present. Sometimes, in the restless dark, I let myself wander into the other world, the one that could have been, the one where someone listened, where flights never took off, where the towers still stood tall, gleaming in the sunlight, where Linda still believed in me. I linger there as long as I can, but morning always comes, and with it, the truth. You see, the thing about warnings is that they rarely sound urgent until the fire's already burning. And once the smoke clears, all that's left are the ashes, the questions, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge of what might have been. It was one of those Pennsylvania evenings that felt like it could stretch on forever. The air was warm but not heavy, the kind of summer night when the fireflies came out early and the breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass over from the neighbor's yard. Somewhere down the street, kids were chasing each other with water pistols, their laughter floating through the twilight. From my porch, the world looked safe, idyllic, even. But in my hands, I held something that didn't fit this picture. It was a torn newspaper clipping, folded twice and worn soft from the way I'd been fidgeting with it all day. The headline wasn't dramatic, no bold fonts or screaming words, just a tucked-away piece from the international section. It spoke of unusual militant activity somewhere far overseas, the kind of thing most readers might glance at and forget before their coffee cooled. But something about it struck me. Maybe it was the vague way it was written, or the mention of a group I'd never heard of, moving in shadows, biding their time. I told myself it was nothing. After all, we Americans were used to danger being something that happened somewhere else, to other people in other countries. But there was a restlessness stirring inside me, like an itch I couldn't scratch. I didn't have a name for it yet, but looking back, I realized it was fear, thin and quiet, but sharp enough to cut through the peace of that summer. Linda came by that evening, as she often did, carrying a basket of still warm blueberry muffins. She kissed my cheek, then leaned against the porch railing, her hair catching the last light of the day. We'd been together for almost 3 years then. She was patient with me, patient in a way that made me believe maybe I was worth the patience. But she noticed the clipping, the crease in my forehead. "What's that?" she asked, her voice soft, almost amused. "Just news," I said, folding it shut. I didn't want to sound crazy, not yet. Not before I knew what I was feeling was real. She smiled, but there was a flicker brief, like the shadow of a bird passing overhead, in her eyes. She'd seen me go down rabbit holes before, chasing strange stories and obscure facts like they were breadcrumbs leading somewhere important. Sometimes they were just breadcrumbs. That night, when the house was quiet and the crickets were keeping time, I sat at my old computer. It was slow, the kind of slow that forced you to think between each click. I searched foreign news sites, obscure forums, anything that might tell me more about what I'd read. And there it was, little fragments, nothing solid, names, dates, places. One name in particular caught in my mind. I didn't know it yet, but soon the whole world would. That was the first time I felt the shape of the storm coming. It was still miles away, but I swear I could smell the rain. In the weeks that followed that summer night, the clipping never left my desk. Sometimes it sat under my coffee cup, other times it was tucked between bills or half-finished crossword puzzles, but it was always close, like a talisman I didn't know how to use. Most nights, while the rest of the town slept, I sat hunched over my old beige computer, the one that wheezed every time I turned it on, scrolling through news feeds from places most Americans couldn't find on a map. The room was lit only by the green desk lamp and the flicker of the monitor, making my little home office feel more like a watchtower than a study. The pieces came in slowly, too slowly to make sense to anyone else. A foreign broadcast in broken English about men training in the desert. A forum post from someone claiming to have seen something near an airfield in the Middle East. And then, one evening in late August, I saw a name. It was buried deep in an article on a small foreign news site, almost an afterthought. I read it twice, then 3 times, feeling a strange heat creep up my neck. I didn't know then that one day, every American would know that name. I just knew it felt dangerous. Linda noticed the change in me. She'd come over with her easy smile and a grocery bag full of things I forgot to buy. Milk, bread, her homemade peach jam, and she'd find me still at the desk, my dinner cold beside me. "You're chasing shadows again," she'd say, brushing a hand over my shoulder. Maybe, I'd answer, but I couldn't look at her, not when I felt the shadows breathing closer. The deeper I dug, the more my stomach tightened. The pattern wasn't clean, not yet, but I could sense it forming, like a puzzle that refuses to reveal its picture until the last piece clicks. And this one, I feared, would not be a pretty one. One night, long after midnight, I shut off the computer and just sat in the dark. My hands were clammy. I thought of the smallness of my town, the safety I'd always taken for granted, the unspoken belief that nothing truly terrible could reach us here. And yet, somewhere far away, men were preparing to make sure that belief would die. If only I could make someone see what I was seeing. If only I could make them care before it was too late. By late September of '99, the puzzle in my mind had taken on a shape I could no longer ignore. The pieces weren't just random headlines and late-night rumors anymore. They formed a picture, blurred, yes, but unmistakably dangerous. And I couldn't sit on it any longer. It was a rainy Tuesday morning when I finally decided to make the call. The kind of rain that falls straight and steady, tapping at the window like an impatient visitor. My palms were damp before I even picked up the phone. I dialed the number for the local FBI field office, my finger hovering for a moment over the last digit. When the line clicked, the voice on the other end was flat, almost bored. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. How can I help you?" I swallowed. "I have information. I believe there's a plan underway for a large-scale terrorist attack. It's foreign-based, but the target will be here in the United States." There was a pause. Not long, but long enough for me to imagine the agent glancing at a clock, scribbling half-hearted notes, maybe wondering what sandwich to get for lunch. "Okay," the voice said finally. "Tell me what you've got." I spoke quickly, afraid my nerve might break if I slowed down. I mentioned the name I'd found, the strange messages on obscure forums, the shifting patterns in overseas news reports. I told them it wasn't just noise, that something big was moving, and it was moving toward us. When I finished, the voice on the other end gave the kind of non-committal hum people use when they're already thinking about the next thing on their list. "All right, sir. I'll pass this along to the appropriate department." That was it. No follow-up questions. No urgency. Just the click of keys in the background and the faint rustle of paper. "Do you understand?" I asked, my own voice sharper than I meant it to be. "If I'm right, people will die. A lot of people." "We'll take it under advisement," he said. "In that way bureaucrats have of making you feel like you've just spoken into an empty room." I hung up, my hand trembling. For a moment I just sat there, staring at the phone as if it had betrayed me. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady and indifferent. That evening I told Linda. She listened quietly, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "They didn't sound concerned?" she asked. "No," I said. "I don't think they believe me." She looked down, then back at me. "Maybe they'll check anyway," she said, trying for optimism. But there was something in her eyes, a mix of worry and doubt, that made my chest tighten. I wanted to believe she was right. I wanted to believe that, somewhere in some sterile government office, a red folder with my name on it had just been set on the right desk. That someone would read it, take it seriously, and set wheels in motion to stop what I feared was coming. But deep down, I already knew the truth. My warning was about to be buried under 1,000 others. If I had stopped then, if I had convinced myself it was paranoia and gone back to my quiet life, maybe things would have been easier. But I couldn't. I had seen too much, and the storm was still coming. First, I kept my mouth shut. After the call to the FBI went nowhere, I thought it wiser to keep my suspicions quiet. Share them only with Linda, and even then, sparingly. But the human need to be heard is a stubborn thing. A few words here and there at the diner counter, a comment after church, a casual remark during a Friday night barbecue. Before long, my theories had made the rounds in our little Pennsylvania town. And that's when the joke started. "Careful, folks," old Jerry Callahan would say with a wink when I walked into the hardware store. "The prophet's here. Better listen or the sky might fall." Laughter would follow, good-natured on the surface, but with that undertone of dismissal that stings more than open ridicule. Even my fishing buddy, Carl, got in on it. One Saturday morning as we loaded the boat, he patted my shoulder and said, "If you hear about any terrorists planning to blow up the Susquehanna, give me a heads up, will ya?" I laughed along. What else could I do? But inside, every chuckle felt like another nail sealing my warning in a coffin no one would ever open. Linda tried to smooth the edges. She'd squeeze my hand under the table when the teasing got too pointed, her eyes telling me she still took me seriously, at least a little. But there were moments, quiet ones, when she thought I wasn't looking, when I caught the flicker of doubt, a shadow across her expression, there and gone in a breath. One night, after a neighborhood cookout where the ribbing had been particularly relentless, we drove home in silence. The headlights washed over the quiet streets, the familiar houses standing guard in their neat rows. Finally, she spoke. "Maybe," she said slowly, "maybe you should let it go for a while. Just rest. People don't understand. And, well, I don't want to see you get hurt over this." I kept my eyes on the road. "Linda, if I let it go, and something happens," she sighed, leaning back in her seat. "And if nothing happens, you'll have spent years scaring yourself to death over shadows." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We both knew I wasn't going to stop. Still, in a different world, one where someone at the FBI had called me back, one where a neighbor had leaned in instead of laughing, I think I might have been able to keep Linda's trust whole. Maybe we'd have sat on that porch on warm summer nights, her hand in mine, talking about ordinary things instead of the storm I swore was coming. But that world wasn't this one. And in this one, I was becoming the town eccentric, the man who saw disasters no one else believed in. And the storm kept moving closer. By the spring of 2001, the noise in my head had turned into a constant hum, a warning siren only I seemed to hear. 2 years of reading, digging, connecting dots no one else wanted to see had left me tired, but also certain. Certain enough that I knew I couldn't let it go without one last push. It was a warm April afternoon when I sat down at my desk, the window open just enough to let in the scent of blooming dogwood trees. Outside, kids were riding bikes, the neighborhood alive with the easy confidence of a country at peace. Inside, I began to type. The letter wasn't short. Couldn't be. I described the patterns I'd traced, the names I'd seen reappear, the methods that seemed so chillingly specific: aviation, synchronized strikes, American soil. I laid out potential dates, targets, the very possibility of using passenger planes as weapons. The words felt like they were being pulled from me, one after the other, until they filled 6 full pages. I read it over twice, each time feeling the same knot of dread tighten in my stomach. Then I printed it, signed it, and slid it into an envelope addressed to the editorial desk of one of the largest newspapers in the country. At the post office, I hesitated for a moment before letting it drop into the slot. My fingertips lingered on the edge of the envelope as if holding it a few seconds longer might make it heavier, harder to ignore. Then it was gone. 2 weeks later, I got their reply. It came in the form of a polite, impersonal letter, 3 sentences, no more. Thank you for your submission. We will review the information and pass it along to the appropriate authorities if necessary. If necessary. I must have read those 2 words a dozen times. Necessary to whom? Necessary when? I imagined my letter sitting in a stack, a red pen scrawling filed, across the top before it was dropped into some gray metal cabinet no one would open again. That night I told Linda. She was sitting on the porch swing, the early spring air cool enough that she wore one of my old sweatshirts. When I read her the letter, she smiled faintly, almost as if to reassure me, but her voice was quiet. Well, at least they answered, she said. I sat beside her, the swing creaking under our weight. It's not enough, I said. I know it's not enough. She leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder. For a moment, I let myself close my eyes and imagine a world where my warning reached the right person at the right time. A world where I could stop looking over my shoulder for the storm I knew was coming. But when I opened my eyes, the street was still quiet, the night still calm, and the uneasy truth still there. I had done all I could, and it still wasn't enough. Somewhere, beyond the reach of our little town, the clock was still ticking. September 11th, 2001 began like any other Tuesday. The air was crisp, the kind of early autumn morning that makes you want to linger outside just a little longer. I was at the kitchen table, nursing a mug of coffee, the radio murmuring low in the background. Linda had left early for work, her perfume still faint in the air, a trace of her that made the house feel less empty. I switched on the TV, more out of habit than anything. The first image didn't make sense. A tower, burning. Smoke black as coal billowing into a blue sky too perfect for such a thing. My first thought was that I'd landed on a movie channel, some new disaster flick I hadn't heard about. Then the words at the bottom of the screen caught up with my brain. Live. New York City. My coffee went cold in my hands. I leaned forward, my pulse hammering in my ears. Every cell in my body knew, this is it. The thing I'd been trying to warn them about. The storm had finally reached shore. And then, before I could even breathe, the second plane came. The anchor's voices broke, the images cut from one angle to another, but I couldn't look away. It was as if my mind split in two, one half watching the nightmare unfold, the other replaying every warning I'd given, every smirk, every polite brush off. I remember standing in the middle of my living room, my hand over my mouth, whispering no, 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 even though I'd been saying yes, yes, yes to this possibility for 2 years. I had seen it coming, but seeing it happen was different. It hollowed me out. The phone rang. I didn't answer. I knew who it would be. Linda, calling to make sure I'd seen, maybe to say I'd been right. I couldn't hear that, not now. Being right had never felt so wrong. Hours passed. The towers fell. People ran through streets choked with ash. The Pentagon burned. Another plane went down in a Pennsylvania field, not far from where I sat frozen in my chair. When the day finally bled into night, I stepped outside. The air was too still, too quiet. Somewhere in the distance, a single dog barked. Above me, the sky was empty. No planes, just an open, black expanse. I thought of the envelope I'd mailed in April, of the letter to the FBI in '99, of every moment someone could have listened but didn't. And in that dark, I made myself a promise. I would never stop remembering this day, not just for the thousands gone, but for the silence that helped take them. And God help me, I wondered, just for a moment, what the world would look like if they'd believed me. The days after September 11th blurred into each other, gray, heavy, and hushed. The TV stayed on almost constantly, the images looping until they were seared into my mind. Faces on missing posters, twisted steel glowing under floodlights, smoke still rising where towers once stood. I barely slept. When I did, the dreams came fast and merciless. In them, I was shouting across an empty room, waving my arms, my throat raw, but no one turned to look. I'd wake soaked in sweat, the echo of my own voice still in my ears. Even in the daylight, I couldn't shake the weight pressing on my chest. People said, "It's not your fault. You're just one man." But I didn't feel like just one man. I felt like the man who had seen the shadows before they reached the door and still hadn't stopped them from coming in. Linda stayed by my side at first. She brought me tea I didn't drink, reminded me to eat when I forgot. She'd rest her hand on mine when the news grew too much, but I could feel her watching me differently now, measuring my silences, wondering how much of what I'd warned her about had been real and how much had been some terrible coincidence. One night, she finally said it aloud. "You did what you could," she whispered, her voice catching. "You told them. You told me. You can't carry the weight of what they didn't do." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But the truth was, belief didn't matter, only the outcome did. And the outcome was written in ashes and names carved into memorials. Sometimes I'd catch myself imagining the other timeline. The one where someone at the FBI had taken notes with real urgency, where my letter to the paper had landed on the desk of an editor with enough authority and courage to act. In that timeline, the planes never left the ground, the towers stood tall, and thousands of families never learned how silence can hollow you out. But then I'd blink and I was back here, in the only world I had, where I was left holding the knowledge that I had been right, and that being right meant nothing. And the guilt never left. It sat with me at the breakfast table. It followed me to the grocery store. It lay beside me in bed at night, whispering in the dark. I didn't know then how long I'd carry it. I only knew it had become a part of me. Some nights, when the weight of it all becomes too much, I let my mind wander to a different America, the one that listened. In that America, someone at the FBI heard the urgency in my voice back in '99 and didn't just write it down to gather dust. They called me back. They asked for details. My letter to the newspaper landed in the hands of an editor who didn't think, if necessary, but instead thought, this is necessary. The chain of belief began, one person convincing another, the urgency spreading like fire. Plans were intercepted, flights canceled. Men who dreamed of turning our own planes against us were stopped before they could step onto a single jet bridge. The morning of September 11th came and went like any other. The sun rose over Manhattan, lighting up towers that would never fall. People streamed into work, stopped for bagels, cursed at traffic, unaware of how close they'd come to disaster. And that was the beauty of it. The best tragedies are the ones no one ever knows were prevented. In that America, I wasn't the town eccentric. I was just a man who paid too much attention to the news, maybe, but one who got to grow old in peace. And Linda, she never looked at me with that shadow in her eyes. We spent our evenings on the porch, her head on my shoulder, our talk full of ordinary things. The future we spoke of was always bright, and it always included each other. Sometimes I imagine the phone call I would have gotten in that world. An unfamiliar voice saying, "Sir, you were right. You helped save lives today." And maybe, just maybe, a note from someone in Washington, not stamped received but thank you. There's a cruel sort of hope, living in a place that doesn't exist. But it's warm there. It smells of fresh-cut grass in the summer and wood smoke in the winter. It's a place where guilt never found me, where the world stayed whole, and where the woman I loved still believed in the man I was. Then the morning comes, and the real world takes its place again. The towers are gone. The names are carved in stone. And the only place that better America exists is in my own head. For years after 2001, my voice felt like it had been locked away in a soundproof room, shouting into walls that swallowed the words whole. Friends stopped asking about my theory. Linda and I drifted until our conversations became little more than polite exchanges. The story I carried felt heavier with each year, and I had no one left who wanted to hear it. Then, one gray afternoon in 2017, I got an email from a name I didn't recognize. Mr. Carter, it read. I'm a journalist working on a piece about people who tried to warn America before September 11th. I've read parts of your letters, and I believe your story is important. I read that line, I believe your story is important, more times than I could count. It was the first time in nearly 2 decades that anyone had used the word believe in the same sentence as my warnings. We met at a small diner off Route 30. He couldn't have been more than 27, all energy and restless curiosity, with a notebook already open before the coffee even arrived. His name was Daniel. He'd grown up after the towers fell. His memories of that day were of news broadcasts and hushed adult conversations, but something about my case had caught his attention. Why keep it to yourself for so long? He asked. I shrugged. Because every time I tried to tell it before, it sounded like a man trying to rewrite history to make himself the hero. And I'm no hero. I failed. Daniel shook his head. You didn't fail. They failed you. And the people need to know that. Something in the way he said it, the steady conviction in his voice, made me sit a little straighter. It wasn't about proving I was right anymore. It was about leaving a record, a trail someone could follow, so the next warning didn't vanish into filing cabinets and polite form letters. For weeks afterward, we met again and again. I handed him photocopies of my letters, my notes, the old newspaper clipping that had started it all. And each time, I saw the same thing in his eyes, a fire I'd nearly forgotten could exist. It didn't erase the past. It didn't bring back the towers or the people or the trust I'd lost. But it lit something inside me. That night, back at home, I found Linda's old photograph in my wallet. I sat there a long time, looking at her smile, wondering if she'd be proud I was finally telling it all. Maybe she'd still think I chased ghosts, but maybe, just maybe, she'd see that even ghosts can teach the living. For the first time in years, I thought, maybe it's not too late to matter. I'm writing this now for someone I'll never meet. Maybe you're reading it 20 years from today, maybe 50. Maybe you weren't even born when the towers fell. If so, you've only seen the images in history books, the smoke, the ash, the desperate faces turned skyward. I lived it. Worse, I saw it coming. This isn't about proving I was right. There's no comfort in being right about something like that. This is about giving you the truth while there's still time for it to matter. The truth is simple and it's ugly. Real warnings rarely look heroic. They look like paranoia. They sound like rambling. They feel inconvenient, even annoying, because they force you to see something you'd rather keep in the dark. And so we laugh at them. We file them away. We say, if necessary, and hope it never is. Until it is. If you take nothing else from these pages, take this, listen. Listen even when it's uncomfortable, even when the person speaking seems strange or obsessive. The cost of ignoring is always higher than the cost of hearing. I've made my peace with the fact that I couldn't stop what happened on September 11th. But I haven't made peace with silence. I tell my story now not to rewrite the past, but to build a bridge for you into the future. Walk it and don't look away. And Linda, if, by some strange twist, these words ever find you, know this. I still keep your photograph in my wallet. The edges are worn now, the colors faded, but your smile is the same. When the world grew heavy and dark, I held on to that smile. I still do, because love and faith, they're the last 2 things that can save us from forgetting who we are. So to whoever you are, wherever you are, if the sky ever darkens and someone tells you the storm is coming, believe them. I warned America once. No one believed me. Next time, maybe you will.